So without any further ado, I'll invite Bernie to make her presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for coming, but most of all, thank you to Gillian for inviting me. I'm always very eager to return to Northern Ireland and Belfast. As Gillian said, this is an ESRC bilateral funded. So we have a colleague in the Republic, Morning Gillifordrick, who's also looking at religion there. And today, with Gillian, who's also on the ESRC grant, and Lisanne, I'm looking at religion in Northern Ireland. And basically, I suppose in some ways, the title gives away what I found. As the title says, Vacant Seats and Empty Pews, Religious Change in Northern Ireland. So what I'm going to argue today is there has been religious change in Northern Ireland since the late 1990s, when the most recent research was done. And the consequences of it are vacant seats and empty pews, meaning the major change has been changes in church attendance. Okay, just to give you, I'm not too sure, yeah, okay. All right, so basically looking just very, very briefly at where we were before. Now, I've been told not to walk around too much because I have a mic and not to put my back to the...
He's telling you to get up.
Okay. Now, I have this thing that I tend to lecture with my back, which is... drives the students crazy, but what the hell. So if you look at previous research from the late 1990s, this was some research which Tony Fahey, Richard Sennett and I did, and in fact in this research we also looked at Europe. So we had a comparison actually of Northern Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, a whole range of European nations. And what we found is that by any standards, whether you look at religious affiliation, what I mean by that is if I ask you what affiliation or religion you are, you put up your hand, you say you're Catholic, Protestant, Jew, Muslim. So if you look at in terms of affiliation, belief in the main tenets of the Christian faith, which is God, afterlife, hell, that kind of thing, and church attendance. Northern Ireland's an outlier, right? It's a deeply religious society up until the late 1990s. The only probably comparison to it is places like Malta, Poland, and possibly the United States. And that's why Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland have always conformed to what they call the exceptional hypothesis. So what they're saying is if you look at Britain or Europe, it's beginning to secularise. In other words, when you ask people in Britain, do they have a religious affiliation, something like 40% now say no. This is not the case in Northern Ireland. Most people would claim to be Catholic, Protestant or whatever. They would believe in God and they would attend church on a regular basis. Now, having said that, we did find some evidence of creeping secularization. This is a term that people in the sociology of religion use, where what they claim is secularization is the degree to which people have moved away from their religious affiliation, religious beliefs, church practices. So we did find, even in Northern Ireland in the late 1990s, I beg your pardon, there was evidence of this creeping secularization. In other words, there was a group of people who claimed they have no religious affiliation. This is when you ask in a survey, do you have a religious affiliation, and you get a whole list. You probably actually, unfortunately, have been tortured over the years in filling out these surveys. And basically, if you run down to the bottom, there usually is a little category or a box down at the very bottom which says no religion. And it's the amount of people who explicitly say they have no religion. This seems to be growing in the late 1990s. So we had a group of people, it's usually about 10% of the population explicitly say they have no religion. There was declining what I call lukewarm attachment to churchly religion. What I mean by that, even though they believe in God, right, they don't run off to church as much as probably other, like the Americans or other Polish people, or even Malta, where everybody seems to go to church as well. So what they call this is, this evidence of creeping secularization, they call the privatization of religion. What they mean by that, it's a very famous saying from a woman at the University of Exeter called Grace Davy, who's just about to retire. At least one of them got away, I'm still waiting. What she refers to this is believing without belonging. And so basically these are people who claim they have a religious affiliation, believe in God, but they don't formally belong to religious institutions in terms of practices. So even though they believe in God, they claim they have an affiliation, they don't go to church a lot. So they're believing, so it's a privatization of religion. In other words, my religion's between me and my God, who I believe in, but I'm not going to run down to the church and you tell me what I have to do. It's called the privatization of religion. Now this is the 1990s, and that's 10 years ago. So what I wanted to see is in the 10 years, we're now in 2010, or whatever, this was the late 1990s from the European Values Survey, where are we now? And basically, huh?
Stay a little bit more in one space.
Oh, sorry, okay. Sorry. Oh, okay. So basically what I want to look at, I want to look at change in terms of these three dimensions. Over the last 10 years, has this creeping secularization of the late 1990s, has it actually, has it got stronger? And so basically I've taken three dimensions of religion. I'm looking at religious affiliation, and this is when I ask you, what is your religion? Are you affiliated in terms of either a Catholic, a Protestant, a Muslim, a Jew, or whatever? The second thing I want to look at is church attendance rates, right? And the last thing I want to look at is belief in the main tenets of the Christian faith. Now, it's the degree to which you believe in God, the degree to which you believe in life after death, heaven, hell, or whatever. And basically I want to see is the elements of the creeping secularization where people still in the late 1990s believed in the main tenets of the Christian faith, but their church attendance rates were beginning to lower. This was what we refer to as the lukewarm attachment to formal religious observances. So basically it's these three things. Looking first at religious affiliation. Oh no, sorry, there's another graph showing the data. Okay, so what do I do? Where do I get this data from? Well, basically, I start with 1968. This was one of the first surveys ever done in Northern Ireland by the famous Richard Rose. It was done just before the outbreak of what they call the Troubles in Northern Ireland. So I moved from 68 to 78 to 1989, all the way to 2008. All these are representative samples of the adult population. What I mean by that is the figures we find from them, we can generalize to the general population of all adults in Northern Ireland 18 years and above. So instead of just looking from the late 1990s, I'm going to track changes from 1968 to 2008. And if I can digress a bit, if I may, this is where I'd like to make the enormous pitch for ARK. We are extremely fortunate in having this data series, particularly the Northern Ireland Life and Times. Now, I know I'm doing religion. Maybe people don't find that maybe as fascinating as other things. But because we have this time series, even though it is cross-sectional, we can actually map changes in Northern Ireland from just before the outbreak of the Troubles to, I suppose, what would be known as the peace settlement in Northern Ireland today since 1998. Okay. First of all, looking at religious affiliation. Now, okay, we didn't actually put all the years in here because it was all getting a bit cumbersome. And so basically I'm starting with the Rose survey in 1968. And what you can see is if you add all these figures, I can't even remember what they were, but if you add all these figures right across, right, the rows, so 41, 22, 28, 5, 4, and 1, there's no question about it. The vast majority, over 90%, I think it's actually 93%, of the population claim to have a religious affiliation. So when we asked them in this survey to identify their religion, 41% said they were Catholic, 22% said they were Church of Ireland, 28% said they were Presbyterian, 5% said they were Methodists, 4% said they were other Christian, and less than 1%, this is back in 1968, claimed that they did not have any religious affiliation. And what you then see as time goes on, as it does, what this table shows, that if you look at it today, right, only about 80%, if you add all these figures, exclude the 13, 7, 4, 22, 17, and 37, so only about 80% today claim a religious affiliation, whereas well over the 90s, way back in 1968. The other thing the table shows you is if you add these figures here, the 22, 28, and 5, in 1968 the Protestant religion was the majority religion. If you take these three main denominations, this is not the case today. They're not over 50%. Where back in 1968 they were, okay? Now there is some, I suppose, debate in the extent to which the other Christians are predominantly a Protestant religion. So if you add the other Christians to it, they still are the majority religion. Okay, so that's the first point, that the people who claim a religious affiliation in Northern Ireland today, excuse me, has dropped. So where have they gone? Well, where they've gone is to this group here. The other thing is there's been a rise of those who claim no religious affiliation, from less than 1% in 1968 to 3% in 1978 to around 12% in 1989, and in 2008, they're now at 13%. But there's one other thing that it shows you. Not only has this group risen, but traditionally the major advances were between the 3 and the 12, okay, which is 78 to 89. This is so the late 70s right through the 80s is when this group began to take off, for want of a better word. What happened to the other religions at that stage? Well, what the table seems to suggest is the one that was disproportionately affected by the rise of this group here were the Protestant religions. So Presbyterians fell from 30% to 23, from 23% to 18. Okay? So what seems to be the case is this rise of non-affiliated group has come disproportionately at the expense of the Protestant tradition. Okay? Now, you might say to me, well, that's all very well, but, you know, they'll all wake up in the morning, get back to religion, what are you on about? Right? So to what extent are this group about to stay? And there's one way we can look at that. And how we can look at that is we can look at religious transmission rates. And basically what the top of the table says is your family religion of origin. And what this slide says is where you are now. Okay? So I was born in the Republic of Ireland, and my name is Bernadette Concepta Hayes. Can anyone guess my religion? I'm Catholic. Okay? And the religion I was raised in, my mother, well, she's passed away, was Bridget Hayes, and my father was Edward Hayes. I don't know how much Edward's a Catholic name. But basically what they said is the group that are more likely, or the most likely, to keep their religion of origin. In other words, 92% of current Catholics were raised as Catholics. They come from Catholic homes. Okay? So this is the group that's the most likely to keep their religion. Okay? So what that seems to suggest is that if you were like me, born in the Republic of Ireland, and unfortunately named Bernadette Concepta Hayes, there's a high probability you're going to die Catholic, you're going to keep it. Right? What this says is there's also a high probability that those who grew up in homes without religion will also keep non-religion. Right? So the point I'm trying to make with this story is that it looks like the 13% are here to stay. Okay? That basically if you're born, the highest transmission rates are from this group and the Catholic group. So basically if you grow up in a Catholic home, you're more likely to stay Catholic. But equally, if you grow up in a home without religion, you're more likely to stay with no religion. The ones where there's least transmission are the Methodists. So only 65% of Methodists, now I mean again it's 2/3 nearly, retain their Methodist traditions. If you look at that in comparison to the 92% for Catholics versus the 89% for those with no religion. So the point I'm trying to make is that the changes we saw in denomination in the late 1990s from our research, actually that was a book comparing Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, is that religious affiliation, people who identify in terms of religion in Northern Ireland is still 80%. It's still 8 out of 10 people, when you ask them here, do they have a religion, will identify as a Catholic, Protestant or whatever, okay? But it has fallen since the late 1960s. And what seems to happen is it seems to be the people who claim a religion are the ones who are less likely to retain it, at least between those years, are people from the Protestant tradition. And where have those people from the Protestant tradition gone? They've gone into the no religion. But the point I'm trying to make is that when they went into the no religion, they carried their children with them, okay? So these are now reproducing themselves at 13% of the population. Is that okay? Okay, so that's the first point, that in fact religious denomination, or the religious affiliation in Northern Ireland is beginning to change. How it's beginning to change is in terms of the rise of this group. This group traditionally has come disproportionately from the Protestant tradition. Now, it isn't up there, but we also looked at some graphs like 2007. It is also true that the Catholic tradition is now also beginning to fall. In other words, more Catholics are now beginning to also move into that category. Okay. All right, that's one way of looking at religion. Remember, we can look at it another way. The other way of looking at it is in terms of church attendance rates, okay? So we can also look at religion in terms of religious practices. To what extent are people still going to church? We looked at the first thing was in terms of, are you willing to admit you belong to a religion? The second thing we're looking at, well, even if you belong to a religion, are you still going to church every Sunday or whenever it is that you're meant to go to church? And what previous research has done is point to the rise of what they call nominal adherence. These are people who, like me, if you ask me what my religion is, I might say I'm Catholic. So I might agree to admit I belong to a religion, but actually, I ain't going to church. So what's happening is you're getting a rise of people who claim, and this is actually a Western phenomenon, a rise of people who are willing to say they're Protestant, Catholic, or whatever, but they do not regularly attend religious services. And in the late 1990s, we saw a little bit of this. That even though 80% of the population, the adult population, remember now this is adults, the adult population of Northern Ireland are willing to claim a religion, the degree to which they are willing to go to church regularly is declining. And this is the graph, right? So these are people who go once a week or more, less often and never, okay? And again, we go back to Richard Rose's survey. So I've plotted this from 1968 to 2008. And what you can see is once a week or more, which is what's usually known as regular church attendance, is nearly at 70% in 1968. Right? Sorry, I'm not meant to be walking around. By the time you come over to here, right, it has fallen dramatically. Right? So basically, but the question is, where are these people going? Right? So here I am, I'm a little Catholic, but I won't go to church every week. Right? Am I never going to church, or am I less often going to church? And if you actually look at the graphs, if you look at the pink line, what seems to be happening is the once a week or more is being replaced by the less often. So these are people, remember, who will not go to church once a week. And remember, we do know that 80% of the population have an affiliation. So basically what's happening is these 80% of people who have no problem saying they're Catholic or Protestant or claiming a religious identity are not going to weekly church attendance. What's happening is they're going less often. They've not been replaced by the never. If they were being replaced by the never, that yellow line would shoot straight up. Does everybody see that? So what's actually happening is the once a week or more is being replaced by the less often. Right? Now the question actually, if I remember correctly, asked something like, outside something like baptisms, marriages or something, do you regularly attend church? So basically what's happening is they get a whole range of options they can answer. Weekly, monthly, less than monthly, a couple of times a year, or never. So these are the people who explicitly say never. These are the group of people who don't say never or who don't say weekly. Okay? So this is why they're called nominal adherents. Because remember, for Northern Ireland, 80% still claim a religious affiliation. Okay? But what's happening is they will tick off the survey they're Catholic or Protestant, but they're not attending church. They're attending it monthly or irregularly. But they're not so much, that line has remained more or less constant. Is what's happened is the blue line and the pink line. And look at it, I mean, you can see the difference in 1968. That's a huge difference. Right? Okay. Oh yeah. All right. Then what we want to see is who are these people in terms of denomination? Okay. So these are the people who are attending church. Now we know they've fallen to about 33% of all people who identify with a religion. That's only about a third, okay? But which are the ones that are less regular church attendance or weekly church attendance? And what you can see is in 1968, I mean, look at the amount of Catholics who attended church weekly. That's phenomenal. Right? That's nearly everyone. Right? And then in social science, you don't usually see statistics like that. We kind of half tell little stories. I mean, you don't see usually things that stark that you can see huge changes and shifts in pattern. So what you see is from 1968 for Catholics, there's been a dramatic decrease in the amount of people who attend church weekly. Now this is actually important because if you're Catholic, you're meant to go to church every week. So in fact, this is actually important because it's something you're meant to be doing. So basically what you're finding is, this is the Northern Ireland adult population in Northern Ireland, okay? So remember, if they're not going weekly, they're not taking their children weekly. These are adults, okay? So basically there's been a massive decrease, particularly among the Catholic community. You also see a drop for Church of Ireland and Presbyterian, but they were kind of less church-going people anyway. Because of their religion, they don't have to keep running up and down to church every week. So they were less going church people anyway, but it's also dropped for them. So in terms of church attendance rates, the major change has come within the Catholic community. Okay, so that was the two things. And then the other thing I wanted to look at, remember I said I'd look at change in relation to three things. One is the degree to which you still claim you have a religious affiliation, so you'll still tick off the box as whether you're Protestant, Catholic or whatever. The other things is in church attendance. But the other thing I wanted to look at was what's known as the privatisation of religion. And this is the famous Grace Davies saying in terms they believe without belonging. And what we saw in the late 1990s is even though there'd been Ireland still was unique. Northern Ireland, actually, and the Republic of Ireland, was still unique in terms of the exceptional hypothesis, in that they were still all going to church to a certain extent. They still all claimed they had a religious affiliation, and they still all believed in the main tenets of the Christian faith. But what we wanted to see was the degree to which these nominal adherents, but in terms of their belief, in other words, has there been a move from the formal sense of religion in terms of its public manifestation, in terms of attending church and things like that, to a more privatized form of religion where I don't run along to church, but I actually still believe in God. So I want to look at, is this the trends or the kind of the inklings we saw in the late 1990s, has this actually increased? Or in fact, even has the privatization of religion begun to decline? In other words, the degree to which they believe in these tenets, is it still the majority of the population, the vast majority of the population, or has it changed? Okay, so what I've done here is these are the percentage who believe, right? And I've looked here at God, life after death, heaven and hell, okay? And the first thing, the very top here, is these are all Protestants. So the very top up there I can't reach. The 83% is all Catholics, okay? Now of these Protestant Catholics, I've also looked at those who are regular attenders. And a regular attender is somebody who goes to church at least once a week. And then we've the irregular attenders. If you think back to my graph a minute ago, these are the people who actually go less than weekly. And the non-attenders, these are the people who don't go never. So this is my old graph of never, weekly, and the in-between, which I think I called occasionally. Right? I've also taken out the group who have no religion. These are the, remember, if you can remember, the 13% who said, when I asked them if they had a religious affiliation, explicitly said they did not. Now, what am I looking for with all these numbers? Well, the thing I'm looking for is the degree to which, even if they're not attending church, like we saw with the Catholics, do they still believe in the main tenets of the Christian faith? If they still believe in the main tenets of the Christian faith, then we have what's known as the privatization of religion. In other words, my religion has got to do with me and my relationship to God, and my belief in God, it has nothing got to do with running up and down to the church every week. Is that what's happening? And what we can see is there is definitely, despite the falls in church attendance rates, the vast majority of the population of Protestants and Catholics still believe in the main tenets of the Christian faith. I mean, that is 83%, 91% for regular. I mean, that's 9 out of 10 people who go to church every week, right, still believe in God, right? And this seems to be particularly true in relation to a general belief in God. We kind of fall off a bit when you move a bit to hell. Maybe we're not as willing to believe in hell. But we definitely believe in God, and we also kind of tend to believe in heaven. Life after death is kind of, you know, but it's still 92, 71, 47. But the point I want to make about this is that even among the irregular attenders, these are not people, remember, who go weekly, and those who don't attend, they still believe in God, okay? 60% is still a majority. So even if you're not attending church, we seem to have held on to the main tenets of the Christian faith. So even if we're not running up and down to church or whatever it is, and we have a religious affiliation, we're either Catholic or Protestant, what is interesting about that table to me is the amount of people who don't attend church but still hold on to this belief in God. So this is what I mean about the privatization of religion. So even if we're not kind of publicly demonstrating our religion in terms of, you know, walking down to church, we still believe in it in a private capacity. Now there is one outlier. The outlier is this group. People, and this is actually different from the 1990s, the late 1990s, people who didn't have a religion still believed in God, right? But what seems to have happened is this group, in terms of their belief in God, life after death, heaven and hell, has fallen away. So I suppose you could say they're becoming true secularists, atheists. I'm not too sure what you want to call them. But there's a marked contrast between levels of belief by those with no religion and those who claim a religion, regardless of whether or not they attend church. And a crucial story of this table seems to be, it doesn't matter in terms of this issue whether you attend church or not. You're still going to believe in God. Okay? Okay, so these are just the support for the privatization. The key beliefs are more widely accepted among regular church attenders, right? But the point I'm making, they're also held to a considerable degree by irregular and non-attenders. And it's particularly so for the belief in God. It's not the case for the non-affiliated. And then I had a quick look, because that did interest me, why these non-affiliated suddenly seem to have given up on God. But what I suggest is this absence of religious faith is a relatively recent phenomenon among the non-affiliated. And if you put on that, you'll see it. So you can see this is what surprised me, because this one here is those with no religion. Right? So what I've done, again, thank you to the Life and Times and the ARK and everything else, I have data from 1991, 1998 and 2008. And all I've done is I've looked at the percentage of people who believe in God, cross-tabulated, or just looked within the different groups of regular attender, irregular attender, non-attender and no religion. And this is my point. If you look at, we start with the most recent 2008, you can see even those who are non-attenders, a majority still believe in God, right? And the overwhelming majority of regular attenders and irregular attenders. Now, it has dropped a bit since 1991, but not really. I mean, it's not a great kind of shift in the ocean, as they say. The one big shift, however, is this group. So in the past, what seemed to be the case, about 70% of those with no religion still believed in God in the early 1990s. But by 2008, this is the group that's falling away. So it looks like that this group is not only abandoning its religious affiliation, claiming they have no religion, is not only abandoning the church, vacant seats and empty pews, but more importantly, it's actually even abandoning the main tenets of the Christian faith. Okay, who are these pioneers of privatization? And what I mean by the pioneers of privatization, these are people as we found out, this is the group, these are nominal adherents. These are people who still claim a religious affiliation, but do not attend church on a regular basis. And they also still believe in the tenets of the Christian faith. These people tend to be, and this is the group that's growing, remember, in Northern Ireland. These people tend to be different from the religiously committed in terms of their social composition. They tend to be young, male, well-educated, single, and I know the single divorce looks odd, but what I mean by that is that if they've married, they've divorced. They usually don't marry, but if they are married, they tend to be divorced, and they tend to be drawn from the ranks of the unemployed. That's previous research. What did we find? We found exactly that, okay? So what I'm looking at here is church attendance by background, right? And the thing we know is the thing that's growing is the irregular attender. Okay? So what I wanted to see, because this is the group that's now growing in Northern Ireland. Remember, we said 80% of the population claim a religious affiliation, but only a third of them go to church on a weekly basis. So these are the nominal affiliates. So they claim a religious affiliation, they believe in God, fine. They claim a religious affiliation, but they're not going to church. And basically I wanted to see, do they conform to the same pattern as previous research, and they do. They tend to be drawn predominantly, they're male, they're single, and they tend to be young. Okay? So the people who are making up this group, and this is why I call them the pioneers of the privatization thesis, because these are the people who are pushing that trend towards claiming a religious affiliation but not attending church. So they tend to predominantly men, single, and young. So you could say to me, well, Bernie, that's all very well and whatever, but they're young people, they'll get sense and they'll return to church. So one of the things I have to be careful of is this is just not a product of what they call a cohort effect, or whether there is a genuine move occurring in the Northern Irish population. Because if you say to me, well, it's only because they're under 45, you probably will have children by then, but you could say to me, well, they're only about 18, 19, 20, they don't know what they're doing, but as soon as the kids come along, they'll go back into church. Is that the case? And you'll be glad to know this is my final slide, more or less. Okay, so for men and women, this lower religious commitment among the young, I would argue, is not just a life cycle effect, but it's an overall shift in behaviour over the last 2 decades. Now, this is very important. If that is what's going on, these empty seats will stay empty. In other words, it's not just something about being 18, 19, 20 and 21. It's something there's a whole shift occurring in the Northern Ireland population. Is that the case? Final one. And here I've looked at men and women, in terms of those who attend church less weekly. And what this table shows you is that it actually is a generational effect. Okay? Now if you start here, these are people aged 18 to 26. These are men up here. Okay? And 18 to 26, in 1990, 54% attended church less than weekly. By 1999, it was 67%. Right? And you say to me, okay, well that's fine. They're still young. What the thing to notice is the other age groups are also increasing. So the 27 to 35 has moved to 68. And by 2008, it has moved to 81. Do you see how it's not a life cycle effect? It's actually a generational effect. Because all the columns, as time moves on. So what's happening is that group, so if you take that group there, that'd be 1, 2, 3. That's that group at 44. In other words, as the life cycles move up, they're not moving back down again. They're taking a whole shift with them. There's only one exception to that, right? So these are the people you have to recreate very, very strongly. And the only exception to that, if I can remember correctly, is among women, 63 plus. There hasn't been a significant move among the 63 plus. Right? But every other group, that's moved from the 54 to 62 has moved to 64. So in other words, what I'm saying is each generation beneath you as you move a bit towards less weekly attendance, the generation, the cohort, your children, or well, that wouldn't be children because they'd only be 10 years younger, but they're also moving. So every time the population ages, the amount of people replacing in the next age group, the non-church attendance rates are going up. So it's a genuine generational effect. Okay, and basically, I mean, these are the only ones. So it'd be interesting, I suppose, hopefully ARK will get funded and we will have a survey in 10 years, 2018, and we can actually see whether or not, and what I expect is the 63 plus, because it's already gone for men. Look, it's gone from 44 to 63. This is the last vanguard. I remember in 10 years, these will be 73, and they'll start to die off, and they'll be replaced by people who have no tradition of going to church. This is the other thing. Okay. All right, you'll be glad to know conclusion, okay? All right. What we suggest is the creeping signs of secularization, which were evident in the late 1990s, have continued to endure and intensify over the last decade. Non-affiliated groups have continued to grow at the expense of the other religiously affiliated counterparts. Remember now, they're now 13% of the population. I remember years ago when I went to Belfast, when I came to Belfast, God, it must be, no, we won't say how long ago it was. The first paper I ever presented was on what I called those with no religion, religious independence. And I nearly got executed for saying this. And so I've always been fascinated with this group. And I think that stage was about 9% of the population. And everybody told me, no, that's a once-off, Bernie. Wait till they get older, they'll all go back to church. No. That's just a little quirk of the survey. But what we can see, my point is about why these stay, is because of the table on religious transmission. They're actually reproducing themselves. That's the key point. However, what I would argue is the most, because remember, they're still about 13%, but the most dramatic changes, I would argue, is the change in terms of church attendance rates. That seems to be the key change in Northern Ireland over the last 10 years or so. In other words, the rise of nominal adherents. These are people who claim they are Catholic and Protestant, but they don't attend church on a weekly basis. And the last thing, I suppose, I also want to end with, I don't know whether you think it's a positive or negative tone, but basically I didn't want to end with a kind of a tale of gloom that nobody believes in God and we've all gone to hell and whatever. I mean, what the point I want to make is Northern Ireland, as of yet, has not abandoned its religious roots. That's the important point. There are changes going on. It looks like the changes are here to stay. But unlike Britain, for example, a majority of the population, still 80%, claim a religious affiliation. And the vast majority continue to espouse the tenets of the Christian faith, but particularly a belief in God. Even those who don't go to church on a weekly basis still claim they believe in God. Even those who never go to church still claim they believe in God. So the basic change, and this is why I called the paper from the very beginning, well, we can't find it. Vacant seats and empty pews. To me, that's the major change in religion in Northern Ireland in the last 10 years. Thank you.
Standing for questions, or do you want to sit down?
Oh no, I'm quite happy. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I hope you all enjoyed and found that as interesting as I did. It's fascinating to hear Bernie explain so clearly some very major changes in terms of our adherence to religion in Northern Ireland. So the floor is now open. If you'd like to ask a question, make a comment, or say something different from your own experience, feel free. I would ask that you speak into the microphone just for recording purposes, if that's okay. So who would like to have the first comment? Or are you all? Okay. Any comments?
I was just curious and wondered.
Yes.
I wondered if you had looked at the transmission rates, you called them, by age at all, even sort of younger and older or something.
No.
From what you're saying, you'd expect to see some differences there. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I think, basically, if we can go back to the way I looked at the transmission rates was, I looked at them in terms of, of this one, right? But I didn't break that down by age, right? So basically, all I looked at, I mean, there basically is a paper there on its own, right? Years ago, I did this with some linear modelling and things like that. The kind of, I don't think I'd even be able to remember how to do it now. I'd have to ask Lisanne to do it for me or someone, or Paula. But basically, I mean, even if I remember from then, it was published, I think, in the Review of Religious Research a long, long time ago. Even with all the, controlling for various things, and it's also true actually internationally, there's something about Catholics. They tend to hold on to their children more. Now, there's a big debate, which you probably know more about than me, in the sociology of religion, of which churches decline and which stay strong. And there was a big debate for a while that the churches there's a big debate in the sociology of religion whether it's the liberal churches are more likely to lose their members or whether it's the conservative churches. And this is the whole debate between Steve Bruce, who keeps going on, and the Stark and those in America. And the consensus of opinion seems to have moved from the more conservative churches being the less likely to hold on to theirs. They in fact claim this is probably the liberal churches now who are less likely. But the other thing about Northern Ireland I find interesting is that unlike America, where there's a lot more mobility within religions, so it's harder to follow. So in other words, if you were raised a Presbyterian, you might wander off and be a Methodist or something like that. What seems to happen in Northern Ireland is there isn't that great movement, and I'd have to put in, I could have actually put in the cross-tab showing both ways. What seems to be in Northern Ireland is when you move to the no religion. Right? There doesn't seem to be a lot of Protestants becoming Catholics or Catholics becoming Protestants. And it is true that if you do childhood origins of these, you'll find they're disproportionately drawn from the Protestant tradition. And I can't see how, I did years ago look at gender mobility, looking at whether religious mobility rates were different for men and women. But I looked at that in Britain, and again what I found is the mobility rates for no religion were much stronger, meaning among men than among women. But off the top of my head, I don't think it would make that much difference for Northern Ireland, because it's not like you have a diverse range. The only thing I can see maybe happening is the other Christian group. But then they're so small that maybe some Protestants, instead of abandoning, go to this other Christian group. But they're so small that I think the major movement is you stay where you are, or if you don't stay where you are, you go in here.
Okay. Next question. This gentleman and then the gentleman at the back. Oh, sorry. You want to start.
Thank you for a very interesting presentation. I suppose you presenting all the facts, and it's very useful to know the changes that's happening in the past several years. But I wonder if you could elaborate what are the reasons behind the change, and why did people move from being Catholic to no religions, and why people stopped going to church, and why there was the vacant seats and empty pews. So, and what
okay, I mean, this is the whole secularization debate. I mean, basically what it is that there's more people more qualified in the room to answer this question than I am. Basically what it says is that as modernization takes place, as societies develop and advance, what happens is you move towards rational thought, and basically you give up religion because there's no place in a rational society. And there's an explanation for Northern Ireland that's kind of divided. But the explanation from Northern Ireland is because of the conflict. People held on to religion because of the particular conflict that was in Northern Ireland. There's other cases, this is the Steve Bruce argument, where it might happen as well. And that's, for example, of immigrants who go to America or whatever. The Catholics will hold on to their tradition, their religion, the Protestants or whatever. And they do that as a form of a safety valve, right? But the argument is that America is the exception. So the argument is that as Europe industrialized, as the population became more educated, religion had no place It was a superstition or whatever, right? So the question has actually always been turned the other way. Why has Northern Ireland remained different? Because Northern Ireland should have gone like Britain. Why didn't we become secular? And the argument is the reason why is because religion fulfilled a function in Northern Ireland society because of the conflict. And it fulfilled the function of security, right? And also it also was perceived to fulfill also, remember, a very divisive function. So in fact, one of the people could argue, I presume, Brendan O'Leary would argue, that religion didn't matter at all. That what religion was it was a cultural marker. And so we held on to religion, but only as a cultural marker to distinguish the two groups into what they wanted the future of Northern Ireland to be, whether to remain within the United Kingdom or whether to form a united Ireland. So in fact, the decline of religion would be what Brendan O'Leary would expect. That because we have now moved, well, we're moving, I suppose, to a post-conflict society, we no longer need religion. And so I suppose the way he'd look at it is the negative and regressive tendencies that was in Northern Ireland because of the conflict will now disappear, and Northern Ireland will move more like other Western advanced secular societies. And what we're beginning to see is the beginning of that now. So again, it's like which academic you talk to and which one you read. I know that's an awful answer to give you, but that's basically how academia works. So they all just disagree with each other. But basically, for me, what's interesting is that Northern Ireland is finally coming into line with the rest of industrialised Europe. Now, what's also interesting, which they can't explain either, is remember there's been a revival of religion in Europe. Church attendance rates in France are going up. So there also seems to be this revival going on as well. And again, of course, the Americans latch onto that because they're so sick and tired of being called the exceptional hypothesis. But the one thing where there has been kind of, the huge movement in religion is in places like South America, where in fact, the explanation, sorry, I don't mean to wander on, but the explanation, there's been a huge rise in Protestant religions in these countries. And the explanation is that the Catholic Church was so corrupt that in fact when the Protestant missionaries went in there, in fact a lot of these countries are now becoming Protestant. But it's not that they're losing their religion, they're just changing to a different affiliation. So I think in terms of sociology of religion, the world is quite interesting at the moment because the old dogmas of secularization seem to be under threat. So nobody quite knows what actually is going on. But the thing most people think is happening is that even if religion is coming back, it seems to be coming back more in terms of the privatization of religion. In other words, my belief in God might come back, but I'm not going to go down and hear the Catholic priest tell me how I should live my life, or the Protestant priest, or whatever, vicar, or whatever. So it's this privatization of belief seems to be coming more back. But having said that, there's been a huge rise of evangelical churches in Britain. But again, you see, I'm a quantitative sociologist. So if I see a rise of 2%, well, that means it went from 1 to 3. And now if you're in sociology of religion, you're fascinated by this, and you think it's absolutely wonderful, because it's trebled. But for me, 3% of the population is not coming or going. Did I answer your question? Did I go around the world? I probably went all around the...
Thank you. It's really in relation to your point there that, it seems that a lot of people are shifting, you say, to no religion. If you consider that Church of Ireland, Presbyterian, Methodist all come under the broad Christian umbrella, in fact, if you look at it from that perspective, what you actually see is that the majority of those that do move away within what might be classed as the Protestant faiths do seem to, on the whole, go to another Christian faith or retain some element of Christianity, and that actually, if you look at those that move away from the Catholic faith, 1% of them go to another Christian, whereas proportionally a greater proportion of those that move seem to go to no religion.
Yeah, you can't really see. Sorry, it's the wrong table. You can't really see that from the table, to be quite honest. Because I presented him down. What you'd need for that is you'd need. I can do it. I can calculate it. You'd need both row and column. I haven't done it. Basically, what this just adds up to 100. And basically what you're saying is the other 1% goes to other Christian and the 7% goes to no religion. Right? And what you're saying here, so I suppose you could say that 89%, because we're looking at the diagonal, right? And what you're saying is if you look off the diagonal, what you're saying, you know, the 73% is Church of Ireland, 7% are going to Presbyterian, 2% to Methodist, and 7% to other whatever. That actually isn't necessarily what they're doing. It's the way the table has been constructed. But the point, you are right, is that the point of the matter is, sorry, I got that caught. The point of the matter is, these are retaining them the most. And if you look at the other graph, because I'd actually have to do the...
This one?
Yeah, if you look at here, now it is true, right? These are the group that has increased, okay? From 3% to 12%. Where are they coming from? Right? They are predominantly coming from the Protestant tradition. I mean, that's 30% to 23, right? So, because remember, this group has to come from somewhere, right? And it is true, there is the bit, I mean, the problem with this as well is that we have to be really, really careful. I think I have something like about 1,000 cases here, right? So basically you have to be very careful when you're doing the childhood. I mean, I suppose if I should do the childhood, I'd have to do it by, I did actually combine some of the years. But remember, any movement in a cell, when the numbers are so small, will look quite dramatic. But this, I think, is actually a better table looking what you want to look at indirectly. Because what this is showing is that as this group has gone down, this group has gone up. So that's actually, but you are absolutely correct. I think the major movement within this and this, if it doesn't exit, you see, you can actually take these out, which I've done, and you can look at their origins. In other words, I just take everybody who now says they've no religion, and I ask them which religion they were raised in. The vast majority come from the Protestant tradition. Right? So even though some might move into the other Christian groups, they are predominantly coming from that tradition. But I mean, the other thing that's missing, sorry, I should have said here, there is actually a figure for 207 that wasn't put in here. And the 207, I think, is 43% Catholic. Right? So what seems to be happening now is for years they were coming out of these groups. But what's finally happening is actually Catholics are beginning to move into this group as well. Right? This is the old debate in the sociology of religion, is that liberal churches were less likely to hold on to their followers. And the Church of Ireland is traditionally considered a liberal church. So basically what they said is, this was the whole argument in America first. These are the churches that would be less likely to keep their members. And that seems to be the case in Northern Ireland. But what seems to be happening now is that this, I think, group will stay and possibly increase. But I think what will happen more and more is it'll draw on all the religious traditions. And one of the things I did say at the end is I had something like for future research. It's not on this overhead. And one of the things I said is future research, what they should look at is what will happen to the Catholic and Protestant population, particularly the Catholic population, is if you have all these people saying they're Catholic, but they're not attending church on a regular basis, how will the church hold on to them? Right? In other words, they do believe in God. I'm not saying that. There's no problem with that. But how will actually the Catholic hierarchy respond to this? In other words, if we do have vacant seats and empty pews, what will be the thing that will make them help them to preserve their religion? In other words, if I have all these kids, even though I'm a Catholic, and I have all these kids who are going to be Catholic, but I don't take them to church, will they still hold on to their Catholic traditions and their Catholic beliefs? I mean, I think to me it is kind of interesting to see where these groups are coming from. But remember, they're still just 13% of the population. I think the key question for Northern Ireland isn't so much that, where these groups are coming from, but what will happen to those people who nominally claim they're Catholic and Protestant, but are not attending church. So all the kind of what would be the structures or the pillars that help you stay within your religious community, they're beginning to fall away. So will we see actually in future that because they're not going to church, will they in fact begin to move from not going to church to actually really, not nominal adherence, but actually the real privatization of religion, where they might continue to believe in God, right? But they will no longer say in surveys they're Catholic, and they will no longer go to church. So to me, that's the crucial thing that religious organizations have to address. Right? Because if you don't bring them in every week to natter to them and tell them what they should be doing, they might go off and do their own thing. Huh? Sorry, I didn't mean to. That sounds like a sermon from the man.
At the back before we. Oh, sorry, I had two more questions. I'll
It's
take both
just,
questions together.
It's just a minor point on one of the tables. It was the Christian tenants, if you could.
Oh, I thought we fixed that.
This one?
It's just the figures that aren't there. For regular attenders on Catholics and regular attenders on Protestant, does that mean there are 9% of Catholics who are regular attenders but don't believe in God? Seems a bit strange. But.
No. What this means, of those who are regular attenders at church, so of those who go to church every week, 91% believe in God. Of those who are regular attenders, those who don't go to church at least once a week, 80% believe in God. Now, of this one, of those who have a religious affiliation, they claim they're Catholic, that's me, they don't attend church at all, never. But 63% still believe in God.
Would you put the question again, I think?
The other figure would be the people who don't believe in God and still go to church. They're 9%.
9% regularly attending church that don't believe in God.
Yeah. Oh, I see what you mean. Oh, yeah, I didn't think about that. Yeah. So that means there's regular attenders, 91% of church. Oh, I'd have to look at the question. Yeah, okay, that's a good point. I'd have to look at the question, because this, you have to be Catholic and you have to go to church weekly. And so you wonder where the other 9% are. Okay, that's a good point. I'll go look at that. I can't remember how the question belief in God was. Yeah, because what you're saying to me, really, that should be 100%.
No, not necessarily.
Okay.
I suppose you could regularly attend church and not believe in God. Wouldn't that be a bit... Yeah, okay, all right, I could see that.
Okay, we obviously could debate that point for ages. There's one last question that I'm going to take from the lady. Thanks,
I was just wondering, your sample base, is that for the indigenous population of Northern Ireland? Were there any ethnic minorities included in that?
Yeah. There are, but there's a very small minority.
small
It's a random sample across the population of Northern Ireland, so
Right.
the number of people who claim to be from a minority ethnic group are relatively small. Okay, well, I would like to thank you all very much for engaging in the discussion. And